Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, a Cadence independent media production. If you're just joining us, what we do here is talking about tips and tricks and tone and hacks and myth busting. And today we're going to talk about snare drums and we're going to make them sound awful and then explain what's going on there. It's pretty fair to say that the snare drum is the center of the kit. It's right in front of you. It's a thing maybe you hit the most in your drumming, or at least close to the most. And the sound it's making really colors the groove. It colors the way that you play. It really has to do with the style and your personal sound. It's everything. And a term we use a lot when we're talking about drums, and especially snare drums, is choking. And it occurred to us here from some conversations online that can be a little bit slippery of a word in terms of what that even means. Like, are there different kinds? And so we're going to explore basically choking the snare drum today. Thanks again to ProMark by D'Addario for helping us out and being our presenting sponsor. I'm doing the Forward Acorn 5A Hickories today. And what we did today is we chatted a little bit before we started about the sorts of choking that we think of when we're trying to get a snare drum to behave in a musical context or recording context. And the three variables that sort of presented themselves were the batter head, the snare side head, and the snare wires. And there are things that happen to those heads or that are done to them, as well as the wires, that can cause a drum to do what we call choking. Now, for me, sometimes people also use the word boxy. That's kind of in the same realm as what we're talking about here. One of these snares is particularly boxy, and we'll get to that later. But what is choking anyway? For me, the way that I think of choking is if I'm going to hit the drum at a variety of dynamics, and at some dynamics it sounds good, other ones it doesn't sound very good, and I'm frustrated with the amount of liveliness and character and depth and all of these kind of, again, slippery words that I'm getting out of the drum. So where I want to start with is a drum that we use a lot here, which is our Pearl Maple 5x14, and we've played it a lot. It's in a ton of videos. I know how to make it sound good. We've made it sound good in a lot of different ways before. And what we're going to do today is take it into choked snare side head territory. And then I'm going to tune the snare side just as high as I can get it to go. I'm going to tune it up, 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 up. And the rationale behind this, which we've talked about in other videos, is people looking for articulation, clarity, crack from the rim shot, all kinds of things that we do want and that we hear in recordings and live situations, but sometimes the methods we use don't always get us what we think they're going to get us, and this is one of those situations. Now, just a side note, this is definitely more of an ear training episode. We really recommend headphones all the time. We especially recommend them for this situation because the subtleties of this are a little bit difficult to capture on video and with minimal kind of simple miking. They are very experiential for the player where you're sitting. And particularly with this first drum, a lot of house kits that I go to play and I see what the house snare sounds like. This is kind of what it sounds like, which is that the batter's been tuned a lot by a lot of different people, and then a lot of people have just kept jacking up the bottom head. There are feel issues here, there are sound issues here, and we'll talk about that after. But first, let's see what this thing sounds like. Now, at first glance, or first listen, this is a functional snare sound. It sounds like a snare drum. But there are a few things jumping out at me that people have talked to me about when they're frustrated with their tuning. The first one I notice as a listener is that the overtones are pretty present. There's a lot of overtone, there's a lot of ring. And a lot of people that I've met think that an unmuffled drum means a ringy drum. And if you watched our videos, you know that that's not necessarily the case. Some drums are ringier than others, and tuning schemes can also do this. Getting into the physics for just a second, when you have the bottom head tuned very, very, very tight, you're telling that head to basically manipulate and boost higher overtones. than if it were tuned lower, because that's what it's going to want to reproduce when it's sending the resonance back through the batter head. So what that means is that it's going to have more sustain in a way in the drum, but it's all going to be very high, and it's going to be kind of wild and unwieldy. It may even sound out of tune when the snare batter head is in tune, because there's a lot of overtones there that can kind of run into each other and make things a little bit hard to manage. It makes a drum like this difficult to record and manage in a mix sometimes, and it leads people to muffle it when you've already choked it, which means you're taking even more volume away, you're taking even more opportunity for crack and high end away. So if that's a problem that you've had in mixes or in live situations where too much ring puts stuff on it, the drum's not loud enough, you're hitting it as hard as you can, and you're frustrated, even if it's like a bell brass, like it can happen. You can do it to any drum. This is a situation to look at your snare side head. Now, the second thing, which cannot be transmitted through video, is that this drum feels very stiff to play. It feels a little like playing on a tabletop. It's uncomfortable to do rolls on. If you've ever played flams very close together and the sticks kind of cancel each other out, or you get a little bit of a phase thing between your hands, it feels uncomfortable. To hit this drum with one stick actually feels kind of like that. It doesn't want the energy that I'm putting into it because the heads are too tight on the bottom in this case. And what that means is that being comfortable in your feel and your pocket can get affected by this, and it can transmit into a more challenging performance for you on something that would otherwise be easy to do. So if your drum feels stiff to you and the batter head is in a tuning range that you like and you want it to feel a little more cushy or a little more like it's giving you something back when you're hitting it, this is a time to look at the bottom head, see just how jacked up it is. If it's not super jacked up and this is also happening, it may just be time to change the bottom head. That's also a thing that can happen, especially if you raise it up and down a lot. But yeah, that's basically the bottom line with this particular situation. All right, recipe number 2, the inverse of this. The batter head super tight, the snare side head in a regular range for a middle of the road kind of snare sound. Now, I chose this Tama drum. Not this one, this is the third drum this here right now. But we use this Tama drum because we've used it a lot for higher tunings and it sounds really great tuned up high. But I added a variable of the sort of head that I've found on kits played by people who are going for a higher tuning and are also very hard hitters, which is an HD dry. This is a very thick head and it's meant to be very durable. It's sort of a live show head, not so much of like a studio kind of thing or maybe in a special scenario. But this brings to mind something that is also common, which is thinking in terms of durability, but then going against the behavior of that head when you go to tune it. So if you're taking a very thick head with venting and a muffling ring around the edge, those sorts of things, this is already a head that's not super interested in resonating or singing for a very long time, which is why they make a great sort of right out of the box good sound. If you crank this head up, it's going to choke out because there's too much material, there's air escaping, and it's just not going to want to behave at high tensions. Now, if you were to use a single ply head with a dot or something like that and crank it up, you would get a much more fun sound to play, frankly, and a lot more dynamics for when you're doing super fast fills and things like that. All right, here we go. Super high tuning, super thick head. Okay, this is a sound that we've heard before. It's in some samples. It actually feels kind of hip-hoppy to me. It also makes sense for hardcore music and things like that where you're playing a lot of very close together notes and they need to cut through and get out to the audience. Now, having said that, I know that bringing the pitch down on this head a little bit, because I've done it, will make for a warmer and more musical sound than this, and without changing anything else. And there's nothing wrong with using this sound if this is the sound that you like. This is more of a situation where I want to inspire people to inspect just how happy they are with the sound that they have and whether or not there's something they can do to improve it or open up, their paint box and have a little more options. Again, to play this drum feels like playing on a tabletop. It's very stiff. Playing rolls on it feels kind of awkward. especially with drum set sticks. It would almost probably feel better with marching sticks since they're designed for that kind of surface. And it's curious that the previous drum had a lower batter and a higher snare side head, and then we flipped it on this one, and the feel frustration is actually the same, which is to say that you hit it and it just doesn't feel good. I wish there were better semantics to describe this, but if you get away from the idea that tension and clarity right here is the thing that you need to have clarity for the audience, there's just a lot more options out there than that. And for a drum situation like this too, tuning it down a little bit and then really making sure that you're playing rim shots when you want it to super project and play in the center for the lower dynamic things. It just makes for a funner playing experience as far as I'm concerned. Drum number 3. This is the one with the over-tightened snare wires. This drum's been in a few videos here. It's a D drum, it's brass. It is a little cantankerous at times, which is also why we chose it for this. It's got some personality, it can be a little finicky sometimes. We've put E-rings on it, we've put tape on it. We've also pitched it up very high in a video about big drums tuned high and like what they can do and what to do with that. And it's got a broad range. Now, this issue, I've noticed, tends to go with people's situations where they want a drum that's a fat sound and is going to be warm in the mix, but they also want to feel articulation under the stick when they're playing ghost notes and when they're playing rolls and things like that. So they will tune the drum down, and then they will over-tighten the wires to try to get the snare articulation back into the drum. I know that this is also a thing associated with trying to get sympathetic buzz out of the drum, but we're just talking about from a sound perspective. Without getting into how sort of bonkers this drum sounds, I just want to talk about specifically the behavior of the wires being too tight. What's happening there is we're literally choking the drum, like in the most literal sense of the expression. We're pressing the wires into the bottom head and making it unable to breathe, choking it. And what that does is when you play at low dynamics, you're not engaging the wires because there's too much tension, and it's not moving the bottom head because the wires are keeping it from moving. And as you move through the dynamics, it starts to move the wires, and then you reach a point where the wires and the bottom head are having sort of a phasing, slappy thing that happens between them. And then when you go to the rim shot, all bets are off. It sounds bananas. There's no crack. It sounds terrible. I have seen people over-tighten them on high-pitched drums. There's less of an issue with that there because generally when you're pitching the drum up very high, you want a short sound anyway. But this, when you're thinking about fat sounds, this is where it starts to become a concern. And if you've enjoyed like our baritone snare video or other ones where we were talking about broad snare sounds, keeping the wires loose and able to behave and do what they're there to do, that's the whole thing. So if you find yourself wanting articulation and a low tuning, you're going to have to split the difference a little bit. There's some losses you're going to have to make, and there's also the possibility that you might have a drum that isn't as dry of an instrument as you might want for the sound that you're going after, especially if it's an orchestral situation or something like that where you need just articulation at every level. But tuning experimentation rather than jacking up the wires, that's the way to go. So to sum up, if I'm playing a gig and I have one snare drum in front of me for the night, I don't want it to be a one-dimensional instrument because I have to play a lot of songs that night. I don't want it to be the same all night. There are situations where there are situations where that's mandatory. But in general, being able to have the drum in front of you do a few different things under your hands that you're just manipulating with your sticks and your brushes and maybe literally your hands is just fun and musical and inspiring and all that kind of stuff, which we love. So making sure that you're allowing your drum to be a drum and make sound and resonate and give you back something so you can actually have a relationship and a give and take rather than just pure stick on a thing and that's it. It's just so worth exploring, and it keeps the playing experience exciting and lively. And every drum has a lot of different options in it, so whatever one you have, Go after them, see what you can find. Also, if you'd like to hear all 3 of these drums with the previously mentioned issues fixed, jump over to the Patreon. That's where that's going to be. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and hit that little notification button down below so that you hear about when we drop new videos. We're still doing them every Tuesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please jump over to the Patreon, check it out, consider supporting us here so we can keep doing what we're doing. We have a lot of things we want to try out, and the support is what's going to make that possible, both on the Patreon and here on our standard YouTube channel. Thanks again to ProMark by D'Addario for being our presenting sponsor and keeping us in the sticks. And I would love to hear your choking drum experiences. This can happen with toms, it can happen with bass drums. It's a drum thing. It happens all the time. And some playing styles can make it happen too, more than others. So I would love to hear your experiences with that. Let us know, okay?